Welcome, Wargamers, to part 3 of my coverage of the first Dawnbringers Crusade book. Hope that you are enjoying it as much as I am. In our previous videos, we introduced the setting and the conflict, meaning we moved the perspective from Gur, as it had been in Dominion, over to Hammerhall, both in Hammerhall-Aqsha, which was last episode, and Hammerhall-Aqsha, which is going to be the focus today. Both halves of the city are being dramatically assaulted by the forces of chaos and destruction and death, and so there's a lot going on for this poor folks, and we're going to get into it. Before getting into that, however, I do want to say two important things. The first one is I am turning ads off on my videos going forward because YouTube monetization is just making videos of my kinds of length unbearable when it comes to how many ads they put in front of you guys, so I'm turning them off. So it really is important, if you are considering getting any Games Workshop stuff or hobby supplies at all, please consider using the affiliate link in the description down below. Not Just Gaming is a great Monpaw shop on the East Coast, but they ship anywhere. And they have discounts on all GW stuff as well as a ton of different hobby product lines. So if you're looking for something for a new project, please use that link because it does throw a tip in my tip jar, and anything you do there is worth about 1,000 views on YouTube. It is appreciated by me, my wife, our cats, the whole channel. Thank you so much. The second big announcement is that I am now part of the Goonhammer News Network now, or not News Network, but media channel. So if you're looking for any cool tactical advice or just conversation about your favorite miniature games, head over to Goonhammer, and you can find them through the link down below. So in our last video, remember Gairan was priming for an assault. The Shutterblight storm that was saturating the city had partially leaked into Aqsha, and so from their perspective, one district, I think it was Kindle Heights, kind of became melancholy, and it seemed infectious, but they were kind of managing. And so now our perspective is going to shift from the horrors that are slowly assailing Hammerhall-Aqsha to what is going on in Hammerhall-Aqsha. There's actually, I want to slip this in here, there's a bit of cool like transitional dialogue as the perspective shifts from Aqsha to Aqsha, where it's like, it just kind of gives you the sense of there's war bands and mercenaries all over the place, that there's, Grot selling their souls and the Flesh Eater Courts hiring themselves out. It was just, obviously a narrative push for like, look, these forces are all over the place as they're trying to sell the mercenary packs or whatever. It was just funny. It was well done. I thought it was cool. But then our camera settles back on Hammerhall, but in Aqsha, like I said before. Now remember, there are heralds of decay here too, because Nurgle is everywhere, and there is an outbreak of the Shutterblight Plague in the Foundry District, which is really important because it's choking progress. So we have to act with some sense of dramatic irony that we don't know what's happening over in Gairan, and just kind of see this from the perspective of the Hammerhall-Aqsha leaders. All they know is sickness came into one of their foundry districts and it started to bottleneck progress. This is the manufacturing epicenter of the mortal realms. They are doing all kinds of stuff, not just making weapons, but just any kind of material needed for these Dawnbringer Crusades. So to have a whole district go cold in terms of like using their forges is unacceptable. And it puts them in a bad way. What they're noticing though, as they're studying this outbreak and trying to understand it before just barging in, is that this cloud, whatever it is, it almost seemed sentient, almost like it was remote controlled. And they know this from the witch hunter reports from the area. We talked about Callus and Toll were introduced in sort of like a little sidebar thing. And yeah, their reports are whatever this like miasma is. First it targeted Kindle Heights, but it spread to other foundry districts, and then it moved into the barracks. Like, it's a very targeted path of where it's going. And as it's doing that, the effects are pretty strange. The same stuff we talked about in the previous videos. There's the same depression, despondency, apathy, to the point where people would just sit and just be immovable, and they would just die. Again, like silently turning off the alarm before the attack. Sometimes leaders would bar themselves up in their rooms, and they would end up being found murdered by nobody. Like, they wanted to isolate themselves so they could come up with their plans, put it all together, and in that isolation somehow they got murdered. No idea what's going on. Again, mysteries aplenty happening in Aqsha is what I'm getting at. The seeds of panic are being sown because no place is safe. Where we work, the forges, and how we provide for our families is all messed up. The place we get our food from, all of Gairan stuff might be tainted, we don't know. Now our professional soldiers are beginning to start falling ill and then just failing as a system. Maybe some of the leaders are being assassinated. We have no idea. Like, there's just so many things that are going on at once that you're like, how can anyone keep sane? And so panic kind of begins to squeeze the city. And there hasn't even been an actual enemy yet. So what do the people of Hammerhall-Aqsha do given a similar circumstance to their neighbors in Hammerhall-Aqsha? So people in Aqsha, they don't have some magical goddess to come swoop in and redirect a waterfall into a rainstorm. The Stormcast Eternals are hesitant to even let people bring water from Hammerhall-Aqsha into Aqsha, because it's like not a controlled substance, but it's a highly monitored thing. It's a very precious material. So you're stuck in the realm of fire, and you need a way to motivate people because everyone is kind of fallen into dreariness. You need to shield them spiritually or magically from this Shutter Blight plague. And so their answer was faith. More specifically, a fiery, zealous kind of faith that burns away impurity. And so it started in the Foundry districts, straight to the epicenter. Priests rolled up and they started building these colossal pyres, these fire pits, effigies, I guess you could say as well, stoking the flames up and just commanding everybody with sermons and shouts and orders, get back to work. And sermons are being preached, faith and zeal and devotion are being stoked back into these warriors. There's something about the faith and belief aspect that allows mortals in the Age of Sigmar setting to overcome things, to fight off the forces of chaos, the corruption of it. One leader within the cities of Sigmar, named Zanta Floria, Archmage of the College of Magic, which would be a massively popular figure, they come in and starting all of these fires. They're trying to actively work on this. The people who are in the College of Magic are like, we need to get everyone super angry for church. That's how we're going to fix this problem. Which is a pretty gnarly solution. And all of that was unsanctioned. There's we understand how to fight this, but it's not something that is technically approved. So I'm just going to go down there and start a bunch of fires in these fire pits and get everyone motivated to work. But this also kind of began a small escalation. So when the priest came in, initially there was success. The fires of faith are burning away the miasma. It's purifying the area. But then things started to escalate. It started with, lighting torches and rituals of zealots walking up and down the streets, trying to purify things, burning all the items and the animals that had a whiff of chaos, but soon that zealous nature of things kind of spilled out of control. Business owners began spreading rumors to take out rivals, politicians being executed for perceived sins, the religious fervor gripped everything, not just the disease. Which seems like a momentous issue for leaders of any kind of civic structure to have to deal with. But at this point, from the city leader's perspective, the priests of Sigmar are confident they can at least direct the zeal of the workers to being efficient, and right now that's what they need. We need to make sure that this never bottlenecks. Progress cannot be stopped. If we need to work on a deeper systemic issue, we can do that later, but right now the foundries are working thanks to the priests. It's just not a good look for anybody when all of these religious fires are being lit all across the city and you become much more puritanical. It makes everybody very uneasy. And it's at this point, when tensions are exceptionally high, that a band of Fyreslayers walks up to the gates of Hammerhall-Aqsha. Now this is a good thing. Fyreslayers are friends of the forces of order, or at least very willing to be hired by them, so it's not an obvious sign of aggression here. And these Fyreslayers are led by Fiori, known as the Grim Barazki, or the Grim Hold Exile, last survivor of his magma hold, Guzenhold, which was located in the Adamantine Chain, overrun by Skaven and Gloomspite Gits. If you look at a map of Aqsha, the Adamantine Chain is actually directly north of Hammerhall-Aqsha, so his place got raided, absolutely destroyed, and he is the last survivor. And as such, he carries the last ember of the Magma Forge from his hold. If you don't know the Fyreslayer series, we went into it, the Magma Forge that they have at the dead center of all of their holds is not only an industrial piece of hardware, but also a religious kind of focal point. So taking the embers out of that fire means if he ever did, he can either use that to smote his enemies or rekindle it somewhere else, add their flame to another flame, and bring people together. It's like a ceremonial type thing as well as it is magical. And as such, he honors the oaths of his former hold, which had a very strong tie to Hammerhall-Aqsha. And so he makes his way there, not really sure what else to do, but the idea is like, well, maybe I'll join one of these Dawnbringer crusades, basically looking for a way to fight and die honorably, serving the bonds of brotherhood that his hold honored in life, which is a great motivation. And as he's traveling, he actually meets up with a bunch of other Fyreslayers from other holds, and they have some very interesting reports. As all these Fyreslayers are kind of randomly collecting along the way from, their mountain ranges to Hammerhall-Aqsha, their stories begin to collect and they paint a picture. Something is going on with the Gloomspite Gits. There's tons of reports of Troggoths with these big rocky growths coming out of them, smashing through several underground passages and holds, so maybe a new species of Troggoth of immense size. There were even reports of a creature with a strange portal on its back, which we've seen a few iterations of in Age of Sigmar, and basically saying something's going on with the Gits because they just have these massive sweeping armies with strength from Troggoths that we've never seen before. Like they have a new weapon, whatever it is. And so as Fury is listening to all these things, he's realizing his mission goes from being a suicide mission where he's just going to join whatever fight he can to now, well, my mission is to warn Hammerhall-Aqsha of what is happening, right? As he's putting the pieces together of where these holds all were, he's like, oh, there's something bearing down on us, like real big time. And so he's like, stop hanging out together. We need to go straight to the city and warn everybody. However, when they get to Hammerhall-Aqsha, there are absolutely no resources to go check this out. Remember, the whole time we've been talking about how they have their own issues. Politically, religiously, in terms of both their output, and it's a mess. And so these Dwarden that came to warn them are essentially quarantined to a part of the city, and they're just told, just sit there and wait until we can spare time to see you. And so they're sitting there, they've lost everything, they tried to warn people, but they aren't being listened to. And not only they're not being listened to, but the church is actively suppressing bad news. Like if anyone talks about a second age of chaos or doom coming, they're just dead. And so these Fyreslayers are very cranky about all this. And really, our story kind of presses pause there for a moment at the scene of Fury and the Fyreslayers just not sure of what to do now that they can't warn the city of what's coming. And we take a step back. And so while all of those things, right, those two arcs of the city in internal turmoil, and then also the Fyreslayers knowing something is coming. While all of that's happening, there's some rumbling going on underground. And we pause here to get a really cool insight into how the Dawnbringer Crusades are functioning. So, while many Dawnbringer Crusades went out in the classic style like we saw in Dominion, out in the open, just a stream of pioneer carriages and carts, whatever, going in a straight line, some of them found out that it's actually easier to survive in the mortal realms if you do so underground. We saw this in the area known as Galay in Gur, where the surface was such a hot savanna that people started to build entire cities underground in sort of like the mountain frameworks that were there. Well, they do it here in Aqsha as well, trying to escape the sun. Of course, it's the realm of fire, gotta get out of the sun. Now, one of these cities that was successfully planted underground was known as Grafa. It was a highly successful City of Sigmar plant that acted as a huge hub of industry, specifically an industry centered around glass blowing. They used the heat of Aqsha. I'm sure there were tons of resources there underground to make glass, and they essentially were a hub of creation of glass bottles needed. And we're going to talk about the reason for their glass bottles here in a little bit, but it was a big, successful city, and they are about to have a very, very bad day. Because on a particular day, throngs of greenskins, specifically Gloomspite Gits, started to hurl themselves at this city. Now, if you know Grots, meaning the goblins, they are obsessed with bottles. They are obsessed with bottles because they cannot make them on their own. But at the same time, all of their leaders, all the wizards, everybody, they want all the bottles that they can get because they want to be able to hold and, transport potions and poisons, which they use in great numbers. So this seems like a no-brainer target, right? You have a city whose main output or whatever, export is glass bottles, and a faction who is always hungry for them. Now, these particular Grots are led by a hero named Braggot and his group known as the Rabble-Rousers. Think of this as a pack of very powerful grots that go from place to place and doing exactly what it sounds like. They just stir up trouble. They get everybody all riled up for a fight. They take them to a fight, and whoever wants to come can just keep rolling with them, or they'll just move along. And Braggot's interesting because he has a whole bunch of boasts that he makes as he comes and stirs up the pot from each Gloomspite hold. Essentially, he says, I saw a Troggoth that was so big it dwarfed mountains, right? Something so big that it hasn't been seen since the Age of Chaos. And most of the, other creatures around him, all the other grots are like, oh, that's such bull. You never saw that, whatever. However, some of the wiser leaders, right? Some of those shaman are looking at him going, well, I don't know if I believe him because he seems like a liar, but if his story is true, he is leading a life that would make sense. Like, Braggot claims that he woke this Troggoth up and then, is constantly running away from it because it wants to kill him for doing so. It's like, well, he is running, and he has been running in, a straight line, and everything behind him kind of goes dark, so they're kind of leaving it open, right? Like, the smarter ones are like, there might be something to this guy. But anyway, that's just his little side quest here. Braggot leads the Rabble-Rousers and this small, tribe of Mugen Clan grots, points them at Greyfa, the Glass Blowers, and they just sweep the place real easily. We're not really given any details onto that battle. I'd kind of love to see it. I'd love a defensive mission where you're trying to protect cargo boxes full of glass bottles from grots. That'd be fun. But that battle is a footnote, right? They're sweeping up the dead, collecting all the things, the trinkets and the shiny stuff that they can find. But some of those leaders of the Gloomspite Gits are looking around. They're kind of just taking it in. They see the big crates full of glass, they see carts, and they see a track. And all of a sudden, those little hamsters inside their brains start turning the wheels as hard as they possibly can, and they realize, oh, wait, these guys just make bottles. Where do they send them? Wherever they send them has to have way more bottles. If they have a whole place that just makes bottles, they probably have other places that make more bottles. And so the idea is they realize, oh, there's a bigger fight that we can do. This could just be the beginning. And so without wasting a whole lot of time, the Gloomspite Gits army runs up this mineway. And wouldn't you know it, this mine goes up under a long, many miles long tunnel directly into the guts of Hammerhall-Aqsha. Again, this was just like an outsourced industrial center. They made glass bottles and then shipped them directly up. And so they have accidentally cut it right into the liver of the forces of order. Archaon couldn't do it, the Glotkin couldn't do it, whole armies of demons couldn't do it, but it took these little Nimrods, Mr. Magooing their way, chasing glass bottles to penetrate the mighty defenses of order. I love that. And so this is where our story reconnects with where we paused it before, with the Fyreslayers, not being able to warn people. Because now they hear explosions detonating in certain districts of Hammerhall-Aqsha. The Gits are pouring up from the industrial works, but in a different section to what was going on before. So now one section is wreathed in miasma of sadness and faith and fury, and this other one is exploding with giggling laughter and cackles of little honey goblins. The Fyreslayers, who were just chilling seconds ago, are asked to go help, and while some of them are like, why would I help them? I wanted to give them a warning, and now the warning is irrelevant. Our hero Fury honors the bonds that his hold had with Hammerhall-Aqsha, and says no, get up, we're gonna go fight. We're gonna go fight some grots because that's what we do. And so they go into one of these districts that's under assault. I'm assuming it's the district that had the mine tunnel lead up and out, but it is absolute disaster. Because these huge kilns and refineries and supply depots and warehouses and forges, they're all burning up. Absolutely destroyed by the Gloomspite Gits and the fires that they are starting. Now, one thing I really like is that as Fury brings, he's kind of leading the defenses. There are other Free Guild soldiers there fighting to put out the fire and stuff as well, but he's leading the Fyreslayers. He walks up and he's kind of doing the mental math. And he's like, this fire is so intense that it's going to kill all of these Gloomspite Gits or force them to retreat down the tunnel. The battle is already won. The problem is, a lot of this machinery is nearly irreplaceable. And so the defenders are now trying to get them out of there and control the fires before those things are destroyed. Which I appreciated. I appreciated doing that mental math of we are going to win. It's just we need to win by this is the margin. And so while a whole bunch of defenders move in, the excessive heat from all of these forges and refineries all going up, the only characters that can withstand the heat are the Fyreslayers themselves. I mean, these guys like hopscotch through magma. And they look around and some grots are on fire, but others are still having a great time as the flames are consuming around them. There's a moment where Fiore spots Braggot across the battlefield, and they both look at each other, and they're like, yeah, and they just start walking, like straight lines towards one another, like, we're going to finish this. Fiore knows if you take out the leader, the grots will scramble, and Braggot knows, I don't like dwarves. That's all he needs to know. And this fight, the scene of it is really cool. And it reminds me of like the classic old world dwarves versus goblins fights that we would see. You know, just waves of Moon Clan grots surrounding Fjord. He's just like swinging his hammers, which again are lit by the last embers of his home forge. And so he's just like going straight through them. He takes out a ton of them before he's clipped in the side by a poisoned spear. And he falls to a knee, and right before he is like surrounded and they descend on him, he takes those two hammers and slams them together. When he does that, fire erupts all around him. I imagine it's kind of like an AoE attack, just burning all of the Gloomspite gets in his area, and it evaporates any grots who are immediately near him. It seems as though the radius, though, didn't quite kill Braggot, like he scorched him a little bit. I think his leg was burned, but he was just out of range to be killed. However, with Braggot now debilitated in some way, the assault is now broken, right? The leader's down. As predicted, the Gloomspite gets immediately shatter as a force, and they start running back down the hill. The offensive is busted, and Fiore collapses, totally unconscious. We lose Braggot in the shuffle, and the Gloomspite gets are in full retreat. And although they had a great time, it seems as though they have clearly misguessed how big this city would be. They knew the tunnel was going somewhere, but they didn't know what the target was at the end. But we are given confirmation that Fiore's actions did save some of the more necessary equipment. The city was knocked down several pegs, but it was not truly like brought to a halt. And I think that's a great place to pause and to talk about why is this story so cool? Well, one of the things I like is that this is happening at the same time as the events in our last video. And after this, I'm going to do a video that kind of recaps like the endpoints of all the characters, Fiore, and all those kinds of things, and kind of set up the narrative leads for the next book. But let's stick with the conflict here in Hammerhall-Aqsha as far as this segment goes. First off, Troggoths. Okay? They like do not show up in this book, and yet they are being set up as an integral part of the campaign. Colossal Troggoths have been, reported by the Fyreslayer refugees. Braggot talks about rousing one of them that hasn't been seen since the Age of the Age of Myth, and he is actively running from them, so he claims. So I like the idea that amidst all the destruction that we're reading about, there's like this undertone of like something bigger is coming on the horizon, but it is vague. Also, something I really liked here is that the book pointed out something specific regarding this industrial quarter that I wanted to touch on. And this is what I talked about earlier. The bottles that were made in Grefa, the city that was destroyed by the Gits, those were being sent to Hammerhall-Aqsha for a very precise reason. These are the measuring tools used for aqua gyranis, which is a substance I have a video about, but basically it's water that's imported all over the realms by the forces of order to use the power of life magic wherever they go. So when these bottle makers are destroyed, the bottling plant, so to speak, is in flames as well, and a shortage comes up right afterwards, and this is all in the middle of the most aggressive expansion effort that Sigmar has ever launched. And aqua gyranis, of course, isn't just water, it's what makes agriculture possible in inhospitable areas. It can be used as currency and more. So by the total accident of the Gloomspite Gits, succeeding this major blow in bottle making manufacturing, which is a weird thing, it destroys like a lot of the economic stability of one of the biggest cities in the Age of Sigmar, but also the sustainability of a lot of crusades going forward. And while I said before, Fiore's efforts saved enough of the sector to avoid total collapse, like things are not good. And I like this because it's a very understandable pressure. Like, sure, aqua gyranis is a bit of a MacGuffin, but it is meaningful in the context of the narrative arc now. And I like that they show that. So friends, those are my thoughts on the Dawnbringers. This is my part 3 of the actions that went down in Hammerhall-Aqsha. I would love to hear your thoughts on them down below, please, and I will chat with you there. Thank you so much for watching and listening, and I'll catch you next time. Happy wargaming.